Thank you for calling Auditory Slam. This is CJ. Who is this?
My name is Rick Ector.
How are you, Rick?
Man, I'm great. How are you doing today?
I am amazingly awesome. I've got a new setup, and it seems to be working correctly. And I figured out that I was a goof and didn't turn my microphone on, so nobody could hear me for the first half hour.
Those things happen.
Yeah, they do, but it's all good. We're going now, and everybody can hear, and I am so thankful for you coming on tonight. I've wanted to do this for quite a while, and I am so thankful for your knowledge and expertise in helping me out with this.
Not a problem. It's always a pleasure for me to make an appearance in the media, whether it's online, broadcast, or in print, to really share the information that's out there and make sure it gets to the right people so that they can make an informed decision as to what they want to do.
Absolutely. Information is so vital, and it can lead to, not having the correct information obviously can lead to some very harrowing and sticky situations, and, obviously really affect a person's life.
Very, very true and very, very sobering. There is a lot of misinformation that's being published by a variety of people for whatever reason, but you want to make sure that you have the most accurate information you can get your hands on, so that not only can you make an completely informed decision, but make a decision that doesn't put you at greater risk of either being harmed yourself or suffering the consequences from our legal system.
Exactly. So explain to everyone the differences between what the law allows as far as open carry and what is required under a concealed, yeah.
Okay. Well, and it's a question of great interest to a lot of people, because a lot of people never really heard much info as to open carry, and it seems as though it's new. Right. And a lot of times people will couch their comments in phraseology such as, hey, can you tell me about this new open carry law? And it's really interesting to me because it just shows that there's a lack of information out there for whatever reason.
Right.
Some people believe that, some information shouldn't be widely available to people for the simple fact that, once you start telling people what their rights are, they might have these crazy notions about exercising them. And so, there are some people, whether they're in actual positions of leadership or within, government at various different levels, don't really, advocate that people do things such as open carry. And essentially what open carry is, at least in the state of Michigan, open carry is openly displaying, in this case we're going to just couch our comments about handguns.
Right.
Openly displaying a handgun in an outside-the-waistband holster, similar to how the police wear their firearms or wear their handguns, such that even a casual observer of your person could readily and at a moment's glance determine that you are armed with a firearm.
Right.
When you're carrying under those circumstances, and in the state of Michigan, if you are on foot, your feet are physically on the ground, you're not in a vehicle, you're not on a bus, you're not on a skateboard, you're not riding a bike, but your feet are firmly on terra firma, you are at least 18 years of age, and that handgun is registered to you, you can legally open carry a firearm in the state of Michigan as long as you stay out of what we call the pistol-free zones, and these are some areas that are defined in the law. And see, one of the interesting intersections between open carry and concealed carry, which we'll talk about very briefly, is that there is an exemption in the law that actually allows people who have concealed pistol licenses to open carry in what we traditionally think of as pistol-free zones. It was brought up, or shall I say reminded, or first introduced to a lot of people just this past week. About a week ago, we had the primaries, and a lot of attention was garnered to this one individual up in the northern suburbs who decided that he wanted to open carry at his polling place. And I believe his polling place was traditionally a pistol-free zone like a school. the law, because of the pistol-free zones for CPL or concealed carry, he could not, under the law, conceal carry a gun in that school to cast his vote. So he still wanted to carry his gun, and he was knowledgeable enough of the law to know that as long as he open carry as an exemption because he had a concealed pistol license, he could do that legally. And he did that, and he raised a lot of eyebrows, but he was acting in full accordance with the law. Now, open carry is obviously a little different than concealed carry. Essentially, concealed carry is that you are not fully displaying it. For open carry, I mentioned that the gun had to be fully exposed. Well, there's a little bit of vagueness in terms of what the actual demarcation is in some cases because, for example, if I had a handgun in my waistband, inside the waistband, and if you saw like maybe the butt or the last half of the frame, some people would argue, well, gee, I can see it, so it must be open. But based on, playing it completely safe, we're saying that would be concealed because it's not fully exposed and someone might miss it. If you put on a jacket or a coat and covered it, obviously that is concealed. And there's no such thing as open carry in a vehicle. If you get into a vehicle with a gun fully displayed on your hip, once you're in that vehicle, you are concealed. And to carry a concealed pistol in the state of Michigan, you're going to require special permission from the state of Michigan. It's a concealed pistol license. Some people refer to it erroneously as a CCW, which is an acronym for carrying a concealed weapon, which is actually a 5-year felony. So if you were actually carrying a concealed pistol without the concealed pistol license, the CPL, then conceivably you would be guilty of that 5-year felony of CCW carrying a concealed weapon. As I stated before, it's punishable by 5 years, so it's something that people want to make sure that they do not accidentally do. With regards to the requirements, they are rather fairly stringent, but they're not as bad as they used to be. Right. Around 2000, Michigan went to a shall-issue style of licensing with regards to CPLs. And essentially, as long as an individual meets state uniform criteria for this license, and I say uniform in the sense that these criteria apply to everyone in the state of Michigan, you shall be issued a concealed pistol license as a matter of law. The discretionary part of discretionary licensing, which was in effect before 2000, had been radically modified and we transitioned to shall issue. But the requirements are fairly simple to understand. As long as you are either a United States citizen or a resident alien, you have been a state of Michigan resident for the preceding 6 months, you can pass a criminal background check, and make no mistake about it, it's not a popularity contest, it's whether you meet the requirements or not. And as of right now, as long as you do not have a felony conviction or the misdemeanor conviction of domestic violence, you stand a good chance of passing a criminal background check. There are some serious misdemeanors that, other than that domestic violence, which may disqualify you for 3 years or 8 years, but it's something that most people who are inquiring about a concealed pistol license don't have on their record.
Right.
But assuming you pass the background check, you don't have any history of mental illness, you haven't been declared mentally insane, or you haven't taken a plea in a court case that you were not guilty by reason of mental defect or temporary insanity, you haven't been involuntarily committed to an institution for your mental health, or otherwise deemed by the state, whether it's a court or whatnot, that have determined that you are a threat to your safety or someone else. So,
right.
Not to be confused with having a simple case of the blues, which we all experience as a natural course of life. Things don't always go our way, and we might get, depressed, but that's not to be confused with mental illness. So,
right.
If you can pass the mental health requirements, you are not a fugitive from justice, a few other things, you don't have an active PPO, personal protection order against you, and you take a qualified, and I stress that word, qualified basic pistol safety training class by an accredited firearms instructor that meets the state's requirements. Upon successful submission and approval of your application, you shall, as a matter of law, receive that concealed pistol license. In many counties in the state, you'll get it right away in the mail once they finish processing. In a few counties that are still holding on to a few vestiges from the past, they may require a more or less ceremonial appearance before the gun board to ask you a few questions like, why do you want a gun, or why do you feel the need to get a concealed pistol license? I mean, it's rather funny, but you know what? If they feel that this shows that they're quasi in control of the process, meaning that discretion has been removed from them, so what?
Right.
So,
and we're talking Kent, Berrien County.
I'm sorry, I'm here. You got a little gobbled there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said we're talking to you, Kent and Berrien County.
I think Lapeer used to be, but they recently moved away from mandatory gun board appearances. Really, there's no need for an individual to show up before, granting your license. You either meet the requirements or you don't. And most of the information they're looking for is all public records. So really, it just requires them to do the background check and do what it takes to make sure you meet the requirements or you don't. And a lot of times, and I'll go ahead and say, a lot of times, county gun boards don't get it right.
Right.
Depending on the county and depending on their interpretation of the law, sometimes they make mistakes. And in making no mistakes, sometimes people get a rejection letter stating that they are not meeting the state's requirements for the license. And just because you get a denial, from the gun board, doesn't mean that you, in fact, do not meet the requirements. It's just a difference of opinion with respect to their interpretation of the statute as it relates to your candidacy for this concealed pistol license. So, if you, as an applicant, are rejected and you feel, I think maybe we need to look at this, it's a fairly simple matter to contact an attorney, someone who's very skilled in this area, who's done it before, to represent you in circuit court, or before it even gets to circuit court. Everyone who is rejected is entitled to a hearing. So they should give you that information along with your rejection notice, and they should give you the justification for their rejection. I've talked to people who received a rejection letter from their county gun board, and there wasn't a reason specified, even though they were supposed to tell them exactly why.
Right.
In any case, you're entitled to a hearing, and if you wish to take them up on their offer to have that hearing, I would strongly advise you not to go by yourself. I would strongly advise you to get counsel and advice and representation of an attorney who has credible experience and skill in that area to represent you. From my experience, from what I've observed when I've been at these gun board meetings, is that there is a very distinct difference in the way that individuals are treated by the gun board when they appear before them. Make no mistake about it, this is an official proceeding. They're going to have you swear in, and you're going to swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth and all of that. But what I found is that individuals who do not have representation at these hearings, it seems that the conversation drifts off and dwells into areas that, in my opinion, are not really germane to the issue at hand, whether the person meets the standards of establishing law or not. From what I've seen from people who have had attorneys there, it's strictly a matter-of-fact conversation as to what the law says, whether there are any differing opinions as to what the law means, and how it applies to this particular candidacy or this particular applicant. And based on that conversation, and that conversation only, will a determination be made. And of course, the decision doesn't always go in your way, but it's definitely in your favor if you do have, some great representation. And if it doesn't go your way, you can still appeal in circuit court to a judge and let a judge make a decision. And one of the great things about the way the law is set up in Michigan anyway is that if the judge determines in his opinion that the refusal to deny the license or the reason for rejecting the license was deemed to be arbitrary and capricious, the judge could say, well, look, it was arbitrary and capricious, and I'm going to award, the applicant not only his license, but I'm also going to award him court costs and attorney fees. So
that's always
for individuals. I'm sorry, me.
I said that's always nice.
It's only fair, right? You were denied because of some arbitrary and capricious interpretations of the statute. Yeah, the least they could do is pay your legal expenses and court fees and court costs. I think that's fair. I think, if anything, it will, force the members on the gun board to objectively evaluate your candidacy and to reasonably articulate their reason for making a decision whether to give it to you or to not give it to you.
Exactly. To answer a question in the chat room for Tammy, basically at that, she asked, can you ask him what happens if you have the open carry and once you get into the car you take it off your hip and put it in your lap? Basically, the second you get into the car, the CPL license is required. Otherwise, you will be, if you were pulled over, you would be guilty of the CCW felony.
Well, definitely, and it goes back to what I said earlier.
Right.
There is no such thing as open carry in a vehicle. If you have a gun in your possession, and if you get into the car, it's considered concealed, and if you don't have a CPL, you're guilty of a felony, and if you get caught, of course, you could be convicted of CCW, and that would be a huge impediment and roadblock if your desire is to one day get a CPL.
Right.
But there is a proper and prescribed way to transport a handgun in a car if you do not have a CPL, and that is to have the handgun unloaded, put it in a case, no ammunition in the case, lock the case up and put it either in the trunk or the rearmost vehicle. This is actually federal law, too. In any state, this is the proper way to transport a firearm in a vehicle without a concealed carry license, even in states under which you can't, have a concealed carry license.
Right. So if you're traveling...
This is actually...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
If you're traveling cross-country, say, then in that instance, say you're traveling through Illinois, which does not have the legal CC or the CPS.
Right. They don't even issue concealed pistol licenses for their own residents.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
There's a concept known as reciprocity, and it's really analogous to the driver's license. Here in Michigan, we have a Michigan driver's license, and reciprocity is granted to us by the other 49 states.
Right.
And so we don't have to have, say, an Illinois driver's license to drive our vehicle in that state. Well, there's a similar concept as it relates to our concealed pistol license. The state of Michigan CPO license is actually one of the most widely recognized concealed carry licenses in the country. To date, as of now, there are 39 other states that recognize our concealed pistol license. So as a reciprocal acknowledgement that we can conceal carry in those areas. Right. However, when you talk about the other 10, which includes the state of Illinois, if you happen to be either traveling to or traveling through, I've been given a lot of discussion lately as to whether I'm going to St. Louis, Missouri next month for the NRA's National Convention, and I may have a need to pass through Illinois depending on what route I want.
Right.
If I was going to take a route that's going to take me through Illinois, I would have to come as close to that Illinois border without crossing it somewhere, get out of my vehicle, unload my handgun, take the ammunition out of it, take the ammunition out of my gun case, put the gun in the gun case, put the ammunition in a separate location, put that locked, encased handgun in my trunk or rearmost part of my vehicle until I passed through and came out on the other side of Illinois, and then acted in accordance with the other state that I'm going to be coming into. The one key thing to keep in mind with respect to reciprocity is that each state that recognizes the state of Michigan license has their own unique variations. Things that are legal here in Michigan might not necessarily be legal there. some of the things you got to watch out for are obviously the pistol-free zones, whether that state has a stand your ground law, or whether you have to exercise a duty to retreat, where retreat doesn't put you at greater harm before using lethal force. Do they have castle doctrine there? There's a litany of things that you need to investigate before you go to these other reciprocal states. But if you do your homework, you can do so safely and legally.
And yes, and another question in the chat room: it does have to be a locked case when it's placed in the trunk.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You want to eliminate any possibility that you have access to it.
Right. The very best thing, and this is what I tell everyone with my limited knowledge, before you go anywhere, and I always tell them, before you go anywhere, any other state, another county, if you're carrying a handgun or you're taking a handgun with you, research the laws. Get a lawyer's opinion or a lawyer's advice, because ignorance is not.
It's not a valid excuse. It definitely isn't.
It's
some of the websites that are out there. Obviously, a good starting place would be the state police website of the other state. Also, that attorney general of that state, who, by virtue of their position, is the person who negotiates those reciprocity agreements. You might want to actually look at the actual statutes themselves. You want to look at some gun internet boards and discussion boards that exist.
Yes.
Then there's some national boards that do a decent job of documenting the laws. But as we found, just like within the last week, gun laws are very fluid. It's a very rapidly evolving and changing subject. What's true today might literally not be true tomorrow.
Yes.
It's a thing that you really need to stay on top of and get the absolute latest information. So it is incumbent upon individuals who are traveling, with their firearms to actually know the latest laws that apply to them and carrying that handgun in their jurisdiction.
Right. Because, again, I can't stress this enough, that the penalties for the people listening are very, very harsh. And now, with everything that's going on in Detroit and Flint, in Michigan especially, with the feds getting involved, a lot of these cases, gun cases, are going to start becoming federal charges. And
yes, the FBI here in the office here in Detroit, it says that as of now, they're concentrating their efforts on the east side. If you're guilty of a gun crime on the east side, they're going to try to prosecute you federally.
Right.
And they feel that federally would be a bigger deterrent, because the sentences they can give you are usually more harsh than you could get they're being prosecuted at the state level. And one other benefit is that if you get convicted of a federal gun crime, you're going to do every day of that sentence, and you have no possibility of early release and parole. So,
right.
You definitely want to make sure you never lost.
Right, and that will follow you more than a state charge. The federal charge will follow you forever and ever. It will never go away, and they will find that so much faster than a state crime. States don't always communicate criminally as far as people's records and that, but they will never miss a federal charge. Well, one thing that does exist for some people, and everyone doesn't qualify, and it speaks to what you're saying about the differences between a federal conviction and a state conviction. At least on the state level, particularly here in Michigan, under these very limited circumstances, a person who has only had one conviction, that is, they only have one conviction on their record, and let's assume hypothetically it's a felony, and it's a felony for which they could not have received a life sentence. Right.
And if they actually followed through with what they needed to do to be in accordance with that conviction, that is, they satisfied any restitution, they did whatever was required with respect to community service, or they paid their fines, they made sure that they attended all of their supervised supervisory, probation, parole, what have you. They met all those requirements, and that conviction is at least 5 years old. I've given you a lot of stipulations, but if all of those things are true, that individual is eligible, after the required 5-year rating time, to actually have that conviction erased from their record. And that's something that exists for a limited number of people at the state level.
Right.
To echo your comments about the federal conviction, the feds, they don't, expunge cases. You catch a federal felony, you're going to have that for life under all circumstances. So. Right.
That's,
it's like a tattoo, man.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. That's exactly it. I hate that there are, so many differences in the state laws. I think it should be a much more universal thing. But like anything, with time and with more people like you educating people, it will get there. And it's really, I think it's with everything that's going on with police forces being cut back more and more every day, mm-hmm. and crime being completely out of control, I think it's imperative that people know about this stuff. And I really miss the fact that a lot of schools don't teach the hunter's education and the gun safety anymore.
I agree with you 100% on that, because the way I look at it philosophically. I mean, if we are discharged with the responsibility of educating our children about the things that they need to know to be productive citizens, not only how to read, how to write, how to count, how to do math, and how to prepare themselves for life in their adulthood before they go off to college. I mean, with respect to the First Amendment, we more than cover, writing and essays and drafting opinions and doing research. We teach our kids how to exercise their First Amendment. What better place is there to educate them about all the others? I mean, obviously the Second Amendment is next, as far as right after the First.
Right.
Why not teach them basic firearm safety? I think we'd have a more rounded curriculum, for one, and two, we're actually showing our children, what is, part of their rights under the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. This is something that they have as a right, and it seems unconscionable to me that we're not educating them in the school system.
Yeah, and I think there would be a lot more, not only understanding of the weapons themselves, but the consequences that go along with it. A much bigger respect, per se, of the weapon itself, and Well,
in the CPO classes that I teach, inevitably, we have to talk about the delicate subject of firearms in children. It's
right.
One of those things that we cover, and it needs to be covered because, we want to make sure that we don't engage in any actions in our home that can lead to a horrific accident. And one of the advices that I give to parents with regards to their kids and guns, I'm a believer that, personally, you need to be open and honest with your kids when they're old enough to understand and they're emotionally developed to handle, the conversation. Get a dialogue going. Let them know that, yes, it's in the house. It's not a toy. It's not something to play with. That it is there for their protection, but it's not something that we need to take off to school. One of my standard, soapbox speeches is that if you're not talking to your children, about firearms, even if you're an anti-gun person, even if you are anti-gun, you are still missing an opportunity to at least educate your children about guns, because even though you're not talking to them about it, everyone else in our society is. And I'm talking about video games, comic books, movies, cartoons, music videos, commercial movies at the theater, the kids in the neighborhood, people at church, and people in school. I mean, everybody is showing some facet of firearms and educating, whether explicitly or implicitly, to your children. And I really think that needs to be balanced with some frank and honest conversation from the parents,
yes,
to let them know that regardless of what they see and where they've seen it or where they've heard it from, this is coming from me as your parent, and I'm telling you, this is what you need to know about guns. And I think that we, as families, need to do that.
Absolutely, and like you said, it goes even beyond the guns to the video games, the music. As a parent, we absolutely are responsible, and there is a very large gap that I see in society where parents simply are not stepping up and doing that, and it saddens me.
Well, and the other argument for why it's not in school is that, before recent history, firearms ownership has really been something that has been traditionally something that was like a rite of passage or a rite of adulthood, something that was typically taught in the home. And as a citizen of this country, in a lot of places, not too long ago, everyone was taught about guns and firearm safety and was taught how to hunt and catch game and engage in sportsmanship. But, as time passed and there were, a couple of significant events that happened in our history and that caused the enactment of certain laws, and then attitudes started to shift, and some people decided, well, you know what, I don't want to, teach my kids about these things, about firearms, and then all of a sudden, then we have this big gap, this lack of information about a very fundamental right that we have as citizens is not being taught to people. And then in this vacuum, this dearth of information out here, a lot of myths, a lot of falsehoods, a lot of rumors and wives' tales are being spread about what this right to keep and bear arms thing is all about, and what it means, and how to do it, and we really need to go back to it. And if we could put the information in the schools, I'd back it 100%.
Right, and I would as well. Rick, I thank you so much for coming on here tonight. For everyone, you can find Rick on Facebook. It's Rick Ector, Ector. You can also find Rick's Firearm Academy, Detroit, Michigan. Rick you are a fully certified firearms instructor, and you also teach classes for Michigan Open Carry, correct?
That is correct. As a matter of fact, I'm doing a benefit class for Michigan Open Carry tomorrow. Michigan Open Carry has been very active, in terms of fighting for our rights to carry guns in general, and specifically for those that do so openly. And one case that they're currently involved with is versus the library system up in Lansing. Lansing has determined that individuals can't carry guns in the library. And so one of the legal justifications, if I understand this correctly, is that they have this library authority, and they feel that this authority entity trumps state law. And of course, our position is no, state law is the ultimate arbiter and decider of what you can do with a firearm in the state of Michigan. We have this preemption law, which basically says that no other level of government other than the state can dictate the sale, transfer, transportation, etc. with firearms. And we are in agreement with the state. Based on current law, nobody other than the state can decide what we can do. And we're hoping for a positive resolution in the case in our favor. And ultimately, if it goes our way, it's going to be a gun rights victory for all gun owners in the state, not just open carry gun owners, but all gun owners.
Yes. Because Michigan is one of the few that I know. I know in the state of Missouri, they don't have a problem. I've seen people in libraries down there carrying weapons. So, it's...
Well, it all depends on the attitude of the community. It's one of those things where if you really wanted to dig into it, we can really talk about some of the origins of gun control and why it was enacted. Really in the city of, actually in the state of Michigan, without giving a long, drawn-out history lesson, a major court case in the city of Detroit occurred back in 1925 when Dr. Oxy Sweet was exonerated of all charges for the murder of two people in a mob of 500 that attacked his home because he had the audacity to move into a nice neighborhood. In that case, he was represented by Clarence Darrow. The presiding judge was Frank Murphy, who went on to become a United States Supreme Court Justice. Absolutely. I mean, it was literally one of those huge court cases. But
yes,
Dr. Sweet and his brother or brother-in-law, I forgot which, but They were exonerated of all charges. You know, they were defending their home, and the law recognized as such. And as a consequence, the state of Michigan enacted the Michigan Firearms Act. And that act basically required the creation of 83 county gun boards to dictate who would be issued gun inspection certificates for handgun purchases and who would be eligible for concealed pistol licenses. So basically, depending on what county you lived in, each county's requirements were not uniform. Each county could dictate what their requirements were. And as a matter of fact, those people who resided in predominantly black counties or counties which had a sizable black or minority position, they were routinely denied for the most trivial of excuses.
Right.
And if you lived in a county in which there weren't an appreciable number of black people, then you were pretty much assured getting it. And it wasn't until the year 2000, when Public Act 381 went into effect, that we established uniform statewide criteria for the issuance of concealed pistol licenses. As a matter of fact, now that we've addressed the underlying reason for county gun boards, there's no reason why the issuance of a concealed pistol license shouldn't be done at the state level as a cost-cutting measure and be a mere endorsement on your identification card.
And I agree with that 100%. There's so many things about what they do on the state level in this state that they don't do, or they do or don't do in other states. Michigan is one of the last holdover states concerning the driver's licenses that still issue, the licenses like 8 to 10 days afterwards. Every other state that I know of literally issues them on the spot.
We have our quirks and idiosyncrasies. I don't know what the prevailing reason for that is, but maybe one day we'll get it corrected. We'll get it fixed. I personally think we need to get the county government out of the issuances of these state concealed pistol licenses.
I think we need the county out of a lot of stuff and the state out of a lot of county and city stuff. I think the balance is I don't think the balance is correct at this point, and I think we need a lot of help. And it starts at the personal level of people standing up and doing the right thing. Hey,
I concur. I concur. And basically for all your listeners out there, whether they're hearing me live or they're listening to a replay or recording, if, some of the things that we're seeing, particularly in our major metro areas, and as a matter of fact, just yesterday there was an individual out in Royal Oak who was a little off balance. He was wielding a knife and he was terrorizing people in a supermarket parking lot.
Yes.
Where, there was a great opportunity for some citizens who were otherwise law-abiding could have been harmed, and if it was not for an individual who had a concealed pistol license, who happened to be there, who happened to observe what happened, and was able to direct the activities of that person with his gun and hold him at bay until police got there. So I'm personally giving that guy, whoever he is, he's anonymous now, I'm giving him big kudos for, one, being licensed and carrying his gun and stepping up and willing to protect other people. But, if incidents like that, whether it's in the suburbs or whether it's, in our inner cities across the state, if personal safety is an issue of yours and you realize that governments are shrinking budgets and the police are increasingly not able to get there fast enough, you need to figure out whether you're willing to take a more active and involved role in your personal safety. And if you are, I would strongly suggest that you get a concealed pistol license. And if you have a desire to learn more, as was stated earlier, you can reach me at DetroitCCW.com or legallyarmedindetroit.com. We'll be more than happy to talk about your particular circumstances and how we can help.
Awesome. I thank you so much, Rick, for your time.
Hey, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. You have a great night.
All right, you too.
Yep.